Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about your planning process that you go through every week as you plan for your guided reading groups. So I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm going to talk about your refinement areas as well, how you plan to be responsive, how sometimes you're responsive in the moment, and just basically like how you line your weekly guided reading plans up. So which group are we going to talk about first?
We're going to talk about the 16 NF group, and some of them in there have already passed the nonfiction, but they need the fiction as well. So 16 NF or 16F.
So what data pieces do you use when you group your students?
I use a multiple of groups. I mean, I have one student in here that's already passed the 16. He's actually like an 18 instructional, but he's within this group because I use not DRA, but like CKLA in his progress monitoring. He has trouble with accuracy, and whereas like this group also is working on accuracy, so he's in this guided reading, even though like this isn't his instructional level. He's in there to receive like that accuracy instruction.
Okay, so you think about two things then when you plan your guided reading. You think about your students that are struggling with accuracy and also your students that are struggling with comprehension. So when you're thinking about this student who's kind of an outlier in this group, how does he merge with the rest of the students when he's doing that comprehension on the 16 nonfiction?
He's normally a strong reteller, so usually when I have them retell, he's typically the listener that gives feedback to the students, whereas I use him kind of like as a model for the other students because retell is not his issue, it's just been accuracy. And there's some students in the group that work with him in accuracy. Even in his other group, like he's paired with somebody that's really good with accuracy. So that student was responsible for listening to him and reminding him of his strategies.
Okay, so we'll talk about that as well, because what I'm noticing you're saying is that this student is in two guided reading groups. So let's just table that for a moment. You said that he is a listener and he provides feedback to students. So what does he use in order to provide feedback to the students?
So for nonfiction, we've been working on this as them giving feedback. So they're listening, and the students have to listen for that main ideal statement first, and then like these are like questions they kind of ask. Did I use? So he's like asking, did you use important vocabulary words? And like those vocabulary words are words from like the text, and also even before I teach a lesson, I give them specific vocabulary words. So I'm wanting to see if they use them in their retell. Did he use connecting words? Did I retell the details in order? So they kind of are like, so this is what he listens for. And it's kind of like checking to see if the student did this. And based on that, I'm trying to get them to give like a glow and a grow. So we'll say, you did this really well, you told a lot of details, but you didn't use like words from the text, or you didn't tell them in order. There was lots of details, but you didn't tell them in order.
Okay, so you're getting ready to plan for this group. So you have a nonfiction text. So when are you going to use fiction text with this group?
I try to do it like 2 or 3 days on the nonfiction book and like 2 days on fiction, because fiction is like the easier thing for the kids to do. It's nonfiction that they really need to work on. So I try to do 2 books a week, one nonfiction and one fiction, but it really depends on their running records. Like if I give them their running record at the end and they're still not accurate on the book, we do spend more time on the nonfiction book. So it like fluctuates based on like, I want them to be fluent before they move on to the next book.
Okay, so walk me through like how you're getting ready to plan for this group. So this will be their book for Monday.
Yep.
So what are some things that you do as you get ready?
So as I get ready, I have to read through the book first. The first time I read through it is looking for a specific vocabulary words. Normally I just use like the words here, words to know, because I know these are going to be words that are going to be important to comprehension. So I know I'm going to write those words down, usually on a card. I usually like to print out pictures to go with them. So I'm reading them for that vocabulary, seeing where it comes in, and I also may like jot a little note of like to ask a question about that vocabulary if it's going to be important towards comprehension. Then I go through and read it again, this time looking for a specific phonetic skill that I noticed that is a trend in the book, but and I know to make sure it includes specific words that I will write down on a card, because I will like model that word, and then like they'll have a guided practice and an independent practice, like say if it's words with a long, or like multisyllabic words maybe with a long, like decorate, I might write down decorate, and that would be a word that we go over together, and write some other words down that have like the phonetic skill that I want them to focus on. And it's reading it like multiple times.
So you're reading multiple times.
Yeah, I'm looking
even in
for,
your planning.
yeah, because I mean when I plan it, they're doing it like different days. Like the first day, I'm planning for them to preview, make predictions, and just read for accuracy. So I'm like reading it, looking for how I'm gonna step out the questions for that day. So I'm definitely looking for words that they might have trouble with just because they have not been exposed to those words. So I'm definitely looking for words like those to write down. Some that may have like a spelling that they haven't learned, because I know already if it's not a spelling they haven't learned, it's gonna trip them up in there. And then I'm also kind of keeping in mind like what we're doing in CKLA. So if there's a skill in there from CKLA, I just want to make sure just a little note. Like sometimes I kind of underline the word just to make a note, see if they're applying the skills from CKLA.
Okay,
and
so
guided
you use
reading.
CKLA as your guiding
And yeah,
tool for the phonics piece. Okay.
CKLA definitely for this group. I think they're ready for that too as well, because like it's just right at their level. These kids are able to keep up in CKLA. They just need like additional practice with the skills from CKLA. So I just always like try to keep in mind what words did we already learn in CKLA, making sure that they're saying those correctly.
Okay, and so it sounds like you write all over the book.
Oh yeah, lots of writing everywhere.
So this is like your guide as you're like working with the students throughout the week.
Yep, I write down my models and my questions, because you you get caught up in the moment sometimes, so you'll forget like the model. Like if I'm gonna model a picture walk, like a purposeful picture walk, I make sure I write it over in here, writing down my questions in here and underlining the words that we're gonna specifically focus on.
So like that's a good way that you're already kind of pre-planning, like I guess the breakdown and difficulties that students are going to already have based on your student, like your teacher knowledge to students, as well as like the data points that you collect for them. So so that's how you per se, I guess, plan to be responsive. What do you do in those moments when you necessarily it's an planned moment occurs and the students tripped up on maybe words, or there's a breakdown in the comprehension? What do you do then?
Usually if it's like an unplanned word, it just depends on what type. Like if it's a skill the kids aren't familiar with, usually I'll just stop and give the part of that word they're not familiar with, but still making sure like they use other strategies to decode the parts they do know. Okay. So that's how I try to be responsive. I have like resources, that I just pull out right away, like their criteria for reading a word. So that's how I try to be responsive. I kind of use that and like the stuff that I learned in Cluster about like how you respond to students when it doesn't make sense, a word. So I just have that in the back of my mind that I'm using that to how I'm going to respond to kids. Comprehension, something I need to work on rather than just giving it to them, but I kind of try to, I guess, think of like questions I can ask to in the moment to get them to think about it. So what do you mean, like as far as for comprehension? Maybe if they're struggling,
like really understanding the concepts that might be presented, especially in a nonfiction book.
Yeah, well, sometimes I have to see first. I guess asking horse. Usually, sometimes it has to do with background knowledge. The students struggle, so if that becomes an issue, I might stop and just explain like concepts to them that may be hindering their comprehension, because I know the students' background knowledge is a bit limited.
Okay. So how do you assess so I can tell that your target for this group it's kind of twofold. So how do you assess if they can read words accurately using their strategies, as well as how do you assess the students on your own? Because I know they have their pre-assessment.
Mm-hmm.
How do you assess if they have if they can retell the facts and details from the book? What do you use as your assessment?
Mm-hmm. So I use anecdotal notes. I am working on, I type up, kind of similar to DRA now, I'm going to type up like the gist of the main ideal and like supporting details that I want them to hit. And as I'm listening to them, I'm going to be underlining if they're getting those main ideal and details. Before, I was just kind of listening. I can't write down everything they say, so I would just like write, I'm kind of like using this as my guide. Okay, they wrote the, they stated the main ideal, they had 3 details, or I might like just jot down that the details were out of order, or they were very vague in their terms.
Okay. So that's that group. And so would you say, is it safe to say that that's basically the planning process that you do with the rest of your groups?
No, this group definitely is different than like my other groups, because this is like twofold, definitely really hit accuracy, background knowledge, and comprehension. It's like an encompass of all things, and the kids in that group, all of them have different needs. You're gonna see in my other groups, they're like grouped together because they have like very specific need that they're all working on. With this group, there's several needs. So with this book, like I really have to make sure that I'm planning questions for each kid within this group.
Okay.